The stone steps descend into darkness, each footfall echoing against walls that have witnessed unspeakable violations of human dignity. Down here, beneath the pristine towers of the Three Sisters, beneath the moonlit grandeur of Caria Manor, lies a secret so disturbing that even the lands between, a realm already steeped in cosmic horror and divine cruelty, seems to recoil from its implications. The air grows thick with an unnatural stillness as you push open the hidden door, and there they are, bodies arranged in perfect rows, kneeling in eternal submission, their eyes vacant, yet somehow still seeing, their minds trapped behind faces, frozen in expressions of servitude. Welcome, lore seekers, to another deep dive with Keen 7 lore, where today we're pulling back the velvet curtain on one of Elden Ring's most sinister mysteries, the puppet collection of Preceptor Seluvis, and the shocking truth about which major characters fell victim to his twisted art. But here's where our story takes its first dark turn, because as you stand in that basement surrounded by these living dolls, you might notice something peculiar about their arrangement, their poses, the way they all kneel in exactly the same position. And if you've progressed far enough in certain quest lines, you might return here to find the puppet master himself, Seluvis, dead in his tower above, kneeling in precisely the same pose as his victims. The hunter has become the hunted, the collector has joined his collection, and suddenly we're forced to ask a question that transforms everything we thought we knew about this storyline. What if the puppet master was himself a puppet all along? This revelation opens doors to corridors of conspiracy that stretch throughout Caria Manor and beyond, touching the lives of heroes and villains alike, revealing a network of control and manipulation that makes the political intrigue of the Shattering seem almost quaint by comparison. We're not just talking about a few unfortunate souls transformed into magical thralls. We're uncovering evidence of systematic harvesting, of friendships destroyed by betrayal, of an Albinauric servant who might be the true architect of horrors, and of major characters whose fates were sealed the moment they crossed paths with forces they never truly understood. The practice of creating human puppets in the lands between has roots that stretch back to the Eternal City, that underground realm of star worshippers and fate weavers who dared to challenge the greater will itself. Long before Seluvis ever brewed his first draft, the Nox people had discovered something profound and terrible about the nature of consciousness and control. They gazed up at their false night sky, at stars that were not stars, but something far more alien, and in that celestial darkness they found a method to transform living beings into extensions of another's will. The foundation of this dark art lies in Starlight shards, crystallized fragments of fate itself that fall like tears from the cosmos. The Nox clergy would gather these shards with reverence and dread, knowing that each one contained the power to rewrite a person's destiny, to sever the threads that connected soul to body while keeping both horrifyingly intact. They would brew these shards into cloudy bluish-black tonics that looked like liquid night, and those who drank, whether willingly in religious ecstasy or forced in moments of betrayal, would feel their very essence slip away like sand through fingers, leaving behind only a hollow vessel awaiting commands. But there's something uniquely cruel about the puppet transformation that sets it apart from simple death or even undeath. The evidence suggests, and I want to emphasize, this is where item descriptions and character behaviors paint a disturbing picture, that the consciousness remains. These aren't mindless zombies or empty shells. Inside each puppet, a mind screams silently, fully aware, but unable to move a single muscle without permission, unable to speak unless commanded, unable to even blink away the tears that their paralyzed tear ducts can no longer produce. They become prisoners in their own bodies. And this imprisonment can last forever, as puppets don't age, don't hunger, don't die unless destroyed. If you're enjoying this deep dive into one of Elden Ring's darkest corners so far, I'd genuinely appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. It makes a real difference in helping this video reach fellow lore enthusiasts through YouTube's algorithm. Your support means everything and helps keep these in-depth explorations, coming. Now, let's examine the victims we can confirm fell into Seluvis' collection, because each one tells a story of ambition, tragedy, or simple wrong place, wrong time misfortune. The most immediately visible member of Seluvis' collection is Finger Maiden Theralina, and her presence raises questions that echo throughout the entire narrative. You can actually summon her spirit to aid you in the battle against Radahn, where she fights with the desperate fury of someone trying to break free from invisible chains. But how did a Finger Maiden, someone who should have been protected by the Two Fingers' grace, end up as a puppet? The answer likely lies in the chaos following the shattering, when the guidance of grace became fractured and Finger Maidens found themselves vulnerable, wandering the lands between seeking Tarnish to guide, but finding only predators waiting in the shadows. Then there's the Jar-White puppet, that naked warrior whose lack of clothing might seem like a small detail, but actually hints at the dehumanization process involved in puppet creation, stripping away not just agency but dignity, reducing a person to their most basic form before rebuilding them as a tool. The Jar-White's combat style when summoned is particularly interesting, wild, aggressive, almost feral, as if whatever process created this puppet left behind only the most primal combat instincts, while everything else that made them human was scraped away like meat from bone. But the truly heartbreaking stories come from the potential puppets, the ones whose fates can change based on your choices. Nepheli Lu, warrior of the Badlands, adoptive daughter of Gideon Ofnir, whose only crime was trusting the wrong person at the wrong moment. If you choose to give her Seluvis' potion, you can watch in real time as one of the game's most honorable characters, someone who stood against injustice at the Albinauric village, becomes another doll in the collection. The transformation doesn't happen immediately. There's a period where she simply vanishes, and you might search the entire game world wondering where she's gone, until you return to that basement and find her there, kneeling, silent, available for purchase like an object in a shop. The Dung Eater presents a different moral quandary entirely. Here's someone whose crimes against humanity are so vile that even other villains seem to revile him, someone who defiles corpses to prevent their souls from returning to the Erd Tree, cursing entire bloodlines with his mere existence. Does such a monster deserve the puppet's fate? Is it justice, or merely replacing one horror with another? If you feed him Seluvis' potion, you can acquire him as a puppet summon, and there's something deeply unsettling about commanding someone who once commanded such fear, about reducing the loathsome Dung Eater to a tool that obeys your every whim. The preservation of personality within these puppets becomes even more apparent when you consider Sellen's situation. The Graven Witch requires a new body for her consciousness transfer, and Seluvis has conveniently prepared one, a perfect, empty puppet vessel waiting to be filled. But this isn't just any puppet body. It's specifically crafted to house a sorcerer's soul, suggesting a level of customization and intentionality in puppet creation that goes beyond simple collection. Seluvis didn't just randomly gather victims. He selected them, prepared specific vessels for specific purposes, building an arsenal of specialized tools disguised as a hobbyist's collection. And speaking of specialized tools, if you're finding value in uncovering these hidden connections and dark secrets of the lands between, consider subscribing to support the channel and join our growing community of lore enthusiasts. Your support truly makes these deep investigations possible, allowing us to spend the time needed to piece together these intricate narratives that From Software has woven throughout their world. Now we need to talk about Dolores the Sleeping Arrow, because her story might be the key to understanding the entire web of relationships and betrayals that led to Seluvis's current state. According to the Spirit Ash description, Dolores once belonged to the Round Table Hold, where she served as both critic and friend to none other than Gideon, Ofnir, the all-knowing. She was a master of St. Trina's sleep arrows, those purple-fletched harbingers of eternal slumber that could drop even the mightiest warriors into dreams from which they'd never wake. But more than her combat prowess, Dolores represented something rare in the lands between: genuine friendship between powerful individuals, a bond of mutual respect that transcended the usual political maneuvering. Yet something happened between Gideon and Seluvis, something so severe that it shattered their association completely, and at the center of that schism was Dolores. The item description is frustratingly vague, stating only that it was because of her that the two men went their separate ways. But when we piece together the timeline and the evidence, a picture emerges of betrayal most foul. Seluvis wanted Dolores for his collection, saw in her abilities with sleep magic something that complemented his own puppet sorceries perfectly. Perhaps he thought Gideon would understand, that their shared pragmatism about using people as tools would extend to this request. He was wrong. The fact that Dolores ended up as a puppet, despite Gideon's presumed objections, tells us something crucial about the power dynamics at play. Either Seluvis was powerful enough to take what he wanted, despite the all-knowing's opposition, or, and this is where things get interesting, he had help from someone Gideon didn't suspect. Someone who could move freely through Caria Manor, someone whose lowly position made them effectively invisible to those who dealt in grand conspiracies and cosmic significance, someone like a servant. We also can't ignore the connection between Dolores's sleep arrows and the puppet creation process itself. Sleep and puppetry share fundamental similarities. Both involve states of consciousness where the body remains functional, but the will is suppressed. It's possible that Dolores's own abilities made her particularly susceptible to puppet transformation. Or perhaps Seluvis specifically needed her abilities to perfect his draft. Imagine sleep arrows that don't just induce slumber, but prepare the victim for transformation, softening their mental defenses like tenderizing meat before the real process begins. The tragedy deepens when you summon Dolores's spirit in battle and observe her fighting style. She moves with a fluid grace that speaks of years of training, each arrow loosed with precision that transcends mere muscle memory. But there's something mechanical about it too, a perfection that feels wrong, like watching a master performer whose heart is no longer in the performance. She fights because she's commanded to fight, shoots because she's ordered to shoot. But whatever spark made her Dolores the Sleeping Arrow, friend and critic of Gideon Ofnir, that's gone forever, leaving only the echo of expertise wrapped in a prison of perpetual servitude. But now, we must confront the revelation that recontextualizes everything. We've discussed so far the truth that hides in plain sight if you know where to look. When certain quest lines reach their conclusion, when Ranni's fate is sealed one way or another, you can return to Seluvis's rise to find the preceptor dead, collapsed in the exact kneeling position as the puppets in his basement. His body shows no wounds, no signs of struggle, just that familiar pose of submission that we've seen repeated dozens of times in the hidden chamber below. And at the same moment, if you visit another location in Caria Manor, you'll find Pidia, the Albinauric servant, meeting his own demise at the hands of his beloved puppets. The evidence for Seluvis being Pidia's puppet all along is overwhelming when examined closely. First, There's the technical detail that Pidia's dialogue is nested inside of Seluvis's dialogue in the files, an organizational choice that Japanese developers don't make lightly. They share the same voice actor, and while From Software often reuses voice talent, the fact that these two specific characters share a voice while also sharing synchronized death scenes cannot be coincidence. When one dies, the other dies, not hours or days later, but at the exact same moment, as if a single thread connecting them both has been cut. Consider Pidia's final words as his puppets turn on him, expressing genuine shock that the dolls he claims to have loved so dearly would betray him. He doesn't speak like a servant who discovered his master's collection. He speaks like an owner whose property has inexplicably rebelled. The puppets that kill him move with purpose, with anger even, as if years or decades of suppressed rage have finally found an outlet. They tear him apart with their bare hands, and there's something deeply personal about the violence, something that speaks of vengeance rather than mere malfunction. The implications are staggering. Every interaction you've had with Seluvis, every arrogant word, every condescending sneer, every elaborate plot to transform Ranni into a puppet, all of it was Pidia speaking through a puppet of his own. The Albinauric servant, looked down upon by the Carian royalty, dismissed as barely worthy of notice, had been operating one of the most elaborate deceptions in the entire game. He used Seluvis's body and reputation to build his collection, to interact with other sorcerers and nobles who would never deign to speak with a mere servant, especially an Albinauric one. This explains so many inconsistencies in Seluvis's behavior and knowledge. How did a Carian preceptor know so much about Eternal City puppet techniques? Because he didn't. Pidia did. Why would someone of Seluvis's supposed station skulk around making dolls in a basement? Because the real person doing it needed a front, a respectable face to present to the world, while the true collector remained hidden. Even Seluvis's elaborate personality, that mixture of arrogance and perversion, might have been Pidia's creation, a character designed to be so off-putting that people would avoid digging too deeply into his affairs. The Albinauric connection opens entire new avenues of investigation. Remember that Albinaurics were artificial beings created through unclear means, potentially by the Eternal City civilization that also pioneered puppet magic. Pidia, as an Albinauric, might have had innate knowledge or affinity for these techniques that others had to study for years to master. His position as a servant gave him access to all areas of Caria Manor, allowing him to observe potential victims, study their routines, identify moments of vulnerability. Who notices the servant refilling wine glasses, changing linens, maintaining the manor, while its occupants discuss matters of cosmic importance? There's also the disturbing possibility that Pidia's puppet network extended far beyond just Seluvis. How many other members of Carian nobility might have been his puppets? How many visiting dignitaries drank wine laced with Starlight shards? How many political decisions, alliances, and betrayals were actually orchestrated by an Albinauric servant playing with dolls? The fact that he operated for so long without detection suggests either incredible cunning or a network of control so vast that those who might have exposed him were themselves compromised. We need to examine the massacre at the village of the Albinaurics through this new lens, because the connections between Seluvis, Gideon, and that atrocity become far more complex when we understand Pidia's role. The village was devastated in a search for Latenna and the secret of the Halig tree, with Gideon's forces showing no mercy to the Albinauric inhabitants. But among the enemies we find there, two stand out as seemingly random: a perfumer and an omen killer. Perfumers don't use Albinauric blood clots in their creations. So why would one participate in this massacre unless they were compelled? The theory that emerges is chilling in its implications. What if these weren't random soldiers but puppets, sent by Pidia through his Seluvis persona to participate in the destruction of his own kind? It would explain the surgical precision of the attack, the way specific Albinaurics were targeted while others were merely killed. Pidia might have been eliminating those who could recognize him, who knew his history, who might threaten his carefully constructed facade. Using Gideon's hunt for the Haligtree medallion as cover, he could clean house while maintaining his image as a loyal servant, even expressing appropriate horror at the tragedy when news reached Caria Manor. This collaboration between Gideon and Seluvis, or rather, between Gideon and Pidia's puppet, takes on new dimensions when we consider that Gideon might not have known he was working with a puppet. The all-knowing, for all his intelligence gathering, might have been completely fooled by Pidia's performance. Or perhaps Gideon did know and simply didn't care, seeing a puppet preceptor as no different from any other tool to be used in his pursuit of knowledge. The pragmatism that allowed him to sacrifice his own adopted daughter would certainly extend to working with artificial beings if it served his purposes. The presence of puppet enemies throughout the lands between suggests this conspiracy extends even further. Those marionette soldiers we encounter in various locations, moving with jerky, unnatural gaits. Were they failed experiments in puppet creation, or successful ones deployed for specific purposes? The merchants who sing sadly in the night, always in the same spots, never truly sleeping. Could some of them be puppets, positioned to gather information, or distribute special items to unsuspecting tarnished? Let's turn our attention to Ranni herself, because her relationship with puppet magic and her knowledge of Seluvis's true nature reveals layers of complexity in this already intricate story. Ranni, who transferred her own soul into a doll body, who exists as perhaps the only willing puppet in this entire narrative, seemed to always know that Seluvis was not what he appeared. When you bring her the amber draft that Seluvis claims will allow you to control her, she doesn't react with surprise or outrage at his betrayal. She seems almost amused, as if watching a child attempt a magic trick she's seen 1,000 times before. The amber starlight required for this special draft is described as a fragment of the night sky itself, a crystallization of fate so pure that it could theoretically override even the will of an Empyrean. The fact that Seluvis thought he could puppet Ranni, a being who had already killed her own flesh to escape the greater will's influence, speaks to either incredible arrogance or complete delusion. But if we understand that this was actually Pidia's plan, it becomes even more audacious, an artificial being attempting to control a god candidate who had mastered the art of soul transference. Ranni's decision to eliminate both Seluvis and Pidia simultaneously wasn't just revenge for an attempted betrayal. It was the surgical removal of a cancer that had been growing in Caria Manor for who knows how long. She likely knew about Pidia's true nature from the beginning, but tolerated his presence for her own purposes. Perhaps she even found it amusing, watching a servant puppet a preceptor while believing himself unobserved. But the moment he overreached, the moment he tried to add her to his collection, she demonstrated why even the most elaborate puppet show must eventually face the reality of true power. The method of their execution is particularly telling. Ranni doesn't simply kill them with magic or send assassins. She turns Pidia's own puppets against him. This isn't just poetic justice. It's a demonstration of the hierarchy of control. Pidia could command puppets through his techniques, but Ranni, having transcended the physical entirely, could override those commands with her will alone. She gave the puppets something Pidia never could or would, a moment of freedom to express their rage against their captor. In that brief, violent moment, Every puppet in that room was more free than they had been in years, even if that freedom only extended to choosing how to tear their master apart. The puppet collection serves as a physical manifestation of this theme, each figure representing not just a person transformed, but a choice unmade, a path terminated, a story edited by someone else's hand. When you purchase these puppet ashes from Seluvis, or rather from Pidia through his proxy, you're not just gaining a summoning tool but participating in this economy of control, becoming complicit in the system that transformed living beings into equipment. Sellen's storyline provides perhaps the most ironic commentary on this entire situation. Here's a sorceress who willingly seeks out puppet transformation as a means of escaping persecution, who views the loss of her original body as a small price to pay for continuing her research. Seluvis provides her with a puppet body specifically prepared for her consciousness, and she transfers into it successfully, seemingly achieving what she wanted. But the cosmic joke is that her pursuit of primeval current sorcery, her desire to transform and transcend, ultimately leads her to become a graven mass, a ball of merged sorcerer faces, neither puppet nor person, but something altogether more horrible. The parallel between Sellen's transformation and puppetry is profound. Both involve the fundamental question of what makes someone themselves. If you can transfer consciousness between bodies, if you can override will with magical compulsion, if you can preserve skill and knowledge while stripping away agency, then what exactly is the self? Sellen believed she could maintain her identity through pure intellectual will, but she ended up proving that transformation always comes with a cost, that every attempt to transcend humanity risks losing it entirely. This brings us to examine other potential puppets throughout the game, characters whose behavior might hint at strings we never noticed. Consider the way some NPCs repeat exact phrases, how they stand in precisely the same spots, how their quest lines can seem almost mechanical in their progression. Is this simply game design, or is From Software suggesting that puppetry is more widespread than we imagined? When Gostok follows you through Stormvile Castle, always watching, always present but never quite interfering, is that dedication or programming? The Shadow of the Erd Tree. DLC adds another layer with characters like Dryleaf Dane, whose transformation into a puppet by the sword hand of Night, Jolan, demonstrates that the practice has spread beyond the lands between. Crucially, Dane appears to retain his personality and memories even as a puppet, able to recognize places and respond to situations with something approaching genuine emotion. This suggests that puppet creation isn't a single technique, but a spectrum of control, from complete override to subtle influence, from total mental death to a kind of living imprisonment, where the self remains but cannot act freely. The community has theorized extensively about other potential puppet victims, and while we must be careful not to see puppets everywhere, certain patterns are hard to ignore. The way some merchants never move from their spots, singing the same mournful songs. The identical movements of certain night enemies, as if they're all following the same choreographed routine. Even some of the demigod's soldiers, fighting endless wars for causes they might not even remember, behaving more like automatons than warriors with genuine conviction. But perhaps the most disturbing implication is that we, the Tarnished, might ourselves be subject to forms of control we don't recognize. We follow the guidance of grace, compelled to seek the Elden Ring through a force we don't fully understand. We die and return, our consciousness preserved through mechanisms that mirror puppet preservation. We can be summoned to other worlds, appearing as golden or red phantoms to fulfill specific purposes before vanishing. Are we truly free actors in this cosmic drama, or are we simply puppets whose strings are less visible, whose masters operate on a scale beyond our comprehension? The economy of puppetry extends beyond just the creation and control of individual victims. There's an entire underground market for these transformed beings, with Pidia acting as merchant, customer, and product simultaneously. The prices he charges for puppet ashes aren't random. They reflect some evaluation of the puppet's worth, their abilities, their rarity. Dolores costs more than common puppets, not just because of her combat abilities, but because she represents a unique piece in this collection, a former Round Table Hold member whose acquisition required breaking apart friendships and alliances. The technical mastery required for puppet creation also raises questions about where this knowledge originated and how it spread. The Eternal City's banishment underground didn't destroy their techniques, merely drove them into shadow where they could fester and evolve. Pidia's knowledge might have come from ancient texts, from experimentation on his fellow Albinaurics, or perhaps from some innate understanding granted by his artificial nature. The fact that he could create specialized vessels like the one prepared for Sellen suggests decades of refinement, countless failures that we never see, rooms full of botched experiments that were disposed of before they could reveal the true extent of his work. We should also consider the role of Starlight shards in the broader economy of the lands between. These items aren't just components for puppet draft. They're crystallized fate, fragments of destiny made tangible. The Eternal City's ability to gather and use these shards might have been what originally triggered the Greater Will's wrath, as manipulating fate directly challenges the established order. Every puppet created represents a fate severed and rewritten, a thread cut from the greater pattern and rewoven according to the puppeteer's design. The relationship between puppetry and other forms of control magic in Elden Ring deserves examination. Bewitching branches can temporarily turn enemies into allies, but this control is fleeting and superficial compared to true puppetry. Mog's blood magic can charm and compel, but victims retain enough self to suffer from their actions. Even the frenzied flame's madness, while overwhelming, doesn't create the perfect servants that puppetry produces. In this hierarchy of control, puppetry stands supreme in its thoroughness, its permanence, and its cruelty. As we near the end of this exploration into one of Elden Ring's darkest practices, we must confront the ultimate questions raised by Seluvis's collection and Pidia's deception. In a world where gods manipulate reality, where demigods wage wars using human soldiers like chess pieces, where the very stars above dictate fate below, is puppetry merely the logical endpoint of power dynamics that already exist? When Marika shattered the Elden Ring and plunged the world into chaos, was she exercising free will or following a script written by forces beyond even her comprehension? The horror of puppetry in Elden Ring isn't just in the violation of individual autonomy. It's in the revelation that autonomy might always have been an illusion. Every character we've discussed, from the lowliest puppet in Seluvis's basement to Ranni herself in a doll body, exists somewhere on a spectrum of control. Somewhere their strings visibly, kneeling in basement chambers. Others, like Pidia manipulating Seluvis, hide their strings while pulling those of others. And at the highest level, forces like the Greater Will and the Dark Moon exert influences so vast and subtle that those affected might live entire lives believing themselves free. The death of Pidia at the hands of his own puppets represents more than just poetic justice. It's a moment where the entire system of control experiences a brief convulsion, a spasm of rebellion that reveals the instability inherent in any structure built on absolute dominion. The puppet's attack wasn't random or mindless. It was targeted, personal, filled with an intentionality that suggests that somewhere, buried beneath layers of magical compulsion, something of their original selves remained. Perhaps that's the ultimate tragedy and hope of the puppet collection. that even in the most complete domination, some spark of humanity endures, waiting for the moment when the strings finally snap. Looking at the collection now, knowing what we know about Seluvis being Pidia's puppet, about Dolores' sacrifice, about the village of the Albinaurics and the widespread network of control, we see not just a basement full of victims, but a monument to ambition's ultimate failure. Pidia sought to collect and control, to build a kingdom where he pulled every string, but he discovered what every puppeteer eventually learns. The more strings you hold, the easier it becomes to get tangled in them yourself. His death came not from external forces, but from the very foundation of his power turning against him. The collection he claimed to love, tearing him apart with hands he had trained to kill. The lasting impact of this story extends throughout the lands between and into our understanding of the game's themes. Every time we summon a puppet spirit, we're reminded of the person they once were. Every time we encounter those marionette soldiers, we wonder who they might have been before transformation. The puppet collection forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about power, control, and what it means to truly live in a world where even death isn't an escape from servitude. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into one of Elden Ring's most disturbing mysteries. The puppet collection of Seluvis, or rather, of Pidia, represents horror that goes beyond simple body horror or magical violation. It's a narrative about power's corruption, about the lengths people will go to control others, and about how those who seek to make puppets of others often end up as puppets themselves, dancing to strings they never noticed until it's far too late. If this exploration has given you new perspective on the intricate web of control and deception woven throughout the lands between, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps make these comprehensive investigations possible, allowing us to uncover the dark truths that From Software has hidden throughout their worlds. Share your own theories about puppet magic and potential victims in the comments below. Did we miss any potential puppets? Do you think Gideon knew about Pidia's true nature? And most unsettling of all, which characters do you think might still be puppets, their strings yet to be revealed? Until next time, remember that in the lands between, not everyone who walks and talks is truly alive. Not everyone who serves does so willingly, and sometimes the most dangerous masters are the ones pretending to be servants. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and above all, be very careful whose drinks you accept in a world where Starlight shards can be dissolved into any draft. This has been Keen 7 Law, and I'll see you in the next investigation into gaming's deepest mysteries.